Hello, I'm Karen Stathoplos, and I will be reading from George R.R. Martin's Game of Thrones, the very first of his installations of this wonderful, crazy story of ancient times, made up, of course, Lannisters, Starks, and Targaryens fighting for the Iron Throne. This prologue sets you right in the fierce cold that is coming. Winter is coming, is the thing the Starks always say, and there are supernatural forces beyond the wall. So here's the prologue. "We should start back," Garrett urged as the woods began to grow dark around them. "The wildlings are dead." "Do the dead frighten you?" Ser Waymar Royce asked with just the hint of a smile. Garrett did not rise to the bait. He was an old man past 50, and he had seen the lordlings come and go. "Dead is dead," he said. "We have no business with the dead." "Are they dead?" Royce asked softly. "What proof have we?" "Will saw them," Garrett said. "If he says they're dead, that's proof enough for me." Will had known they would drag him into the quarrel sooner or later, and he wished it had been later rather than sooner. "My mother told me dead men sing no songs," he put in. "My wet nurse said the same thing, Will," Royce replied. "We have a long ride before us," Garrett pointed out. 8 days, maybe 9, and night is falling. Ser Waymar Royce glanced at the sky with disinterest. "It does that every day about this time. Does the dark unman you, Garrett?" Will could see the tightness around Garrett's mouth, the barely suppressed anger in his eyes under the thick black hood of his cloak. Garrett had spent 40 years in the Night's Watch, and he was not accustomed to being made light of. Yet it was more than that. Under the wounded pride, Will could sense something else in the older man. You could taste it, a nervous tension that came perilously close to fear. Will shared his unease. He had been 4 years on the wall, and he had been a veteran of 100 rangings by now, and the endless dark wilderness that the Southrun called the Haunted Forest had no more terrors for him. Until tonight. Something was different tonight. There was an edge to this darkness that made his hackles rise. All day, Will had felt as if something were watching him, something cold and implacable that loved him not. Garrett had felt it too. Will wanted nothing so much as to ride hell-bent for the safety of the wall, but that was not a feeling to share with your commander, especially not a commander like this one. Ser Waymar Royce was the youngest son of an ancient house with too many heirs. He was a handsome youth of 18, gray-eyed and graceful, slender as a knife. He wore black leather boots, black woolen pants, black moleskin gloves, and a fine, supple coat of gleaming black ringmail over layers of black wool and boiled leather. Ser Waymar had been a sworn brother of the Night's Watch for less than half a year, but no one could say he had not prepared for his vocation, at least insofar as his wardrobe was concerned. "Mormont said we should track them, and we did," Garrett said. "They're dead. They shan't trouble us no more. There's hard riding before us. I don't like this weather. If it snows, we could be a fortnight getting back. And snow's the best we can hope for. Ever seen an ice storm, my lord?" The lordling seemed not to hear him. He studied the deepening twilight in that half-bored, half-distracted way he had. Will had ridden with him long enough to understand that it was best not to interrupt him when he looked like that. "Tell me again what you saw, Will. All the details. Leave nothing out." No one could move through the woods as silent as Will. "The camp is 2 miles farther on over that ridge, hard beside a stream. I got as close as I dared. There's 8 of them, men and women both. They put up a lean-to against the rock. The snow's pretty well covered it now, but I could still make it out. No fire burning, but the fire pit still plain as day. No one moving. I watched a long time. No living man ever lay so still." "Did you see any blood?" "Well, no." "Did you see any weapons?" some swords, a few bows, one man had an axe. Did you make a note of the position of the bodies? Will shrugged. A couple are sitting up against the rock, most of them on the ground, fallen, like. Or sleeping, Roy suggested. Fallen. Despite himself, he shivered. You have a chill? Royce asked. Some. The wind, my lord. The young knight turned back to his grizzled man-at-arms. What do you think might have killed these men, Garrett? He asked casually. It was the cold, Garrett said with iron certainty. I saw men freeze last winter and the one before when I was half a boy. Everyone talks about snows 40 feet deep and how the ice wind comes howling out of the north. But the real enemy is the cold. It steals up on you quieter than will. And at first you shiver and your teeth chatter and you stamp your feet and dream of mulled wine and nice hot fires. It burns, it does. Nothing burns like the cold, but only for a while. Then it gets inside you and starts to fill you up, and after a while, you don't have the strength to fight it. It's easier to just sit down or go to sleep. They say you don't feel any pain toward the end. You go weak and drowsy, and everything starts to fade, and then it's like sinking into a sea of warm milk, peaceful like. Such eloquence, Garrett, Sarah Waymar observed. I never suspected you had it in you. I've had the cold in me too, lordling. Garrett pulled back his hood, giving Sarah Waymar a good long look at the stumps where his ears had been. You ought to dress more warmly, Garrett. If Garrett said it was the cold, Will began. Have you drawn any watches this past week, Will? Yes, my lord. What was the man driving at? And how did you find the wall? Weeping. Will frowned. He saw it clear enough now that the lordling had pointed it out. They couldn't have froze, not if the wall was weeping. It wasn't cold enough. Royce nodded. Right, lad. We've had a few light frosts this past week and a quick flurry of snow now and then, but surely no cold fierce enough to kill 8 grown men, men clad in fur and leather, let me remind you, with shelter near at hand and the means of making fire. The knight's smile was cocksure. Will, lead us there. I would see these dead men for myself. And there was nothing to be done for it. The order had been given and honor bound them to obey. Will went in front. Sarah Waymar Royce came next. Garrett brought up the rear. Twilight deepened. The stars began to come out. A half moon rose. Will was grateful for the light. We can make a better pace than this, surely, Royce said when the moon was full risen. Not with this horse, Will said. Fear had made him insolent. Perhaps my lord would care to take the lead? Sarah Waymar Royce did not deign to reply. Somewhere off in the wood, a wolf howled. Will pulled his horse over and dismounted. Why are you stopping? Waymar asked. Best go the rest of the way on foot, my lord. It's just over that bridge. A cold wind whispered through the trees. Waymar's great sable cloak stirred behind like something half alive. There's something wrong here, Garrett muttered. The young knight gave him a disdainful smile. Is there? Can't you feel it? Listen to the darkness. Will could feel it. 4 years in the night's watch, and he had never been so afraid. What was it? Wind, trees rustling, a wolf. Which sound is it that unmans you so, Garrett? The trees press close here, Will warned. That sword'll tangle you up, my lord. Better a knife. If I need instruction, I will ask for it, the young lord said. Garrett, stay here, guard the horses. Garrett dismounted. We need a fire, I'll see to it. How big a fool are you, old man? If there are enemies in this wood, a fire is the last thing we want. There's some enemies a fire will keep away, Garrett said. Bears, direwolves, and other things. Sarah Waymar's mouth became a hard line. No fire. Finally, Garrett looked down. No fire, he muttered. Lead on, Will. Will threaded their way through a thicket, then started up the slope to the low ridge where he had found his vantage point under a sentinel tree. The great sentinel was right there at the top of the ridge where Will had known it would be, its lowest branches a bare foot off the ground. Will slid in underneath, flat on his belly in the snow and the mud, and looked down on the empty clearing below. His heart stopped in his chest. For a moment, he dared not breathe. Moonlight shone down on the clearing, the ashes of the fire pit, the snow-covered lean-to, the great rocks, the little half-frozen stream. Everything was just as it had been a few hours ago, except they were gone. All the bodies were gone. Gods, he heard behind him. A sword slashed at a branch as Sarah Waymar gained the ridge. He stood there beside Will, long sword in his hand, his cloak billowing behind him as the wind came up, outlined nobly against the stars for all to see. Get down, Will whispered urgently. Something's wrong. Royce did not move. He looked down at the empty clearing and laughed. Your dead men seem to have moved camp, Will. Will's voice abandoned him. He groped for words that did not come. It was not possible. On your feet, Will, Sarah Waymar commanded. There's no one here. I won't have you hiding under a bush. Reluctantly, Will obeyed. I am not going back to Castle Black, a failure on my first ranging. We will find these men. Up the tree. Be quick about it. Look for a fire. Will turned away wordless. There was no use to argue. The wind was moving. It cut right through him. He went to the tree, began to climb. Soon his hands were sticky with sap. Down below, the lordling called out suddenly, Who goes there? Will heard uncertainty in the challenge. He stopped climbing. He listened. He watched. The woods gave answer, the rustle of leaves, the icy rush of the stream, a distant hoot of a snow owl. The others made no sound. Will saw movement from the corner of his eye, pale shapes gliding through the wood. He turned his head, glimpsed a white shadow in the darkness. Then it was gone. Branches stirred gently in the wind, scratching at one another. Will opened his mouth to call down a warning, and the words seemed to freeze in his throat. Perhaps he was wrong. Perhaps it had only been a bird, a reflection on the snow, some trick of the moonlight. What had he seen, after all? Will, where are you? Sarah Waymar called up. Can you see anything? He was turning in a slow circle, suddenly wary, his sword in his hand. He must have felt them as Will felt them. There was nothing to see. Answer me, why is it so cold? It was cold. Shivering, Will clung more tightly to his perch. A shadow emerged from the dark of the wood. It stood in front of Royce. Tall it was, gaunt and hard as old bones, with flesh pale as milk. Its armor seemed to change color as it moved. Will heard the breath go out of Sarah Waymar Royce in a long hiss. Come no farther, the lordling warned. His voice cracked like a boy's. The wind had stopped. It was very cold. The other slid forward on silent feet. In its hand was a long sword like none that Will had ever seen. No human metal had gone into the forging of that blade. It was alive in the moonlight, translucent, a shard of crystal so thin that it seemed almost to vanish when seen edge on. There was a faint blue shimmer to the thing, a ghost light that played around its edges, and somehow Will knew it was sharper than any razor. Sarah Waymar met him bravely. Dance with me then. He lifted his sword high over his head, defiant. His hands trembled from the weight of it, or perhaps from the cold. Yet in that moment, Will thought, he was no longer a boy, but a man of the night's watch. The other halted. Will saw its eyes, blue, deeper and bluer than human eyes, a blue that burned like ice. They fixed on the long sword, trembling on high, watched the moonlight running cold along the metal. For a heartbeat, Will dared to hope. They emerged silently from the shadows. 2, 3, 4, 5. Sarah Waymar must have felt the cold that came with them, but he never saw them, never heard them. Will had to call out. It was his duty. And his death, if he did. He shivered and hugged the tree and kept silence. The pale sword came shivering through the air. Ser Waymar met it with steel. When the blades met, there was no ring of metal on metal, only a high, thin sound at the edge of hearing, like an animal screaming in pain. Royce checked a second blow and a third, then fell back a step. Another flurry of blows, and he fell back again. Behind him, to right, to left, all around him, the watchers stood patient, faceless, silent, but invisible in the wood. They made no move to interfere. Again and again the swords met until Will wanted to cover his ears against the strange, anguished keening of their clash. Ser Waymar was panting from the effort now, his breath steaming in the moonlight. His blade was white with frost. The others danced in the pale blue light. Then Royce's parry came a beat too late. The pale sword bit through the ringmail beneath his arm. The young lord cried out in pain. Blood welled. It steamed in the cold, and the droplets seemed red as fire when they touched the snow. Ser Waymar's fingers brushed his side. His moleskin glove came away soaked in red. The other said something in a language that Will did not know. His voice was like the cracking of ice on a winter lake, and the words were mocking. Ser Waymar Royce found his fury. "For Robert!" he shouted, and he came up snarling, lifting the frost-covered longsword with both hands and swinging it around in a flat sidearm slash with all his weight behind it. The other's parry was almost lazy. When the blades touched, the steel shattered. A scream echoed through the forest night, and the longsword shivered into 100 brittle pieces, the shards scattering like a rain of needles. Royce went to his knees, shrieking, and covered his eyes. The watchers moved forward together as if some signal had been given. Swords rose and fell, all in a deathly silence. It was cold butchery. The pale blade sliced through ringmail as if it were silk. Will closed his eyes. Far beneath him, he heard their voices and laughter, sharp as icicles. When he found the courage to look again, a long time had passed, and the ridge below was empty. He stayed in the tree, scarce daring to breathe, while the moon crept slowly across the black sky. Finally, his muscles cramping and his fingers numb with cold, he climbed down. Royce's body lay face down in the snow, one arm outflung. He found what was left of the sword a few feet away, the end splintered and twisted like a tree struck by lightning. Will knelt, looked around warily, and snatched it up. The broken sword would be his proof. Garrod would know what to make of it, and if not him, then Maester Aemon. He had to hurry. Will rose. Ser Waymar Royce stood over him. His fine clothes were a tatter, his face a ruin. A shard from his sword transfixed the blind white pupil of his left eye. The right eye was open. The purple burned blue. It saw. The broken sword fell from nerveless fingers. Will closed his eyes to pray. Long, elegant hands brushed his cheek, then tightened around his throat. They were gloved in the finest moleskin and sticky with blood, yet the touch was icy cold.